Hi, and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. Today I had a few ideas because it was a pretty rainy day and so I spent a lot of time inside, and I was thinking about videos that I want to record, and there's a new little slew coming your way soon, but there's one video that I've wanted to make for a while, and that is, of course, this one. I first got the idea for this video when I was reading on Lauren Coleman's website, Cryptomundo, about an alleged incident concerning US Navy SEALs in the Congo encountering mystery primates. That in itself could be a whole different video, because we won't be delving into it specifically in this video. However, we will be discussing the cryptid that alleged incident has to do with. That cryptid being the Kalanoro. What I think makes the Kalanoro so interesting is its anatomy. The Kalanoro, which has been sighted on mostly Madagascar, but also described along the East African coast, is usually described as a lower primate-like creature that mostly dwells in trees and caverns, is probably carnivorous, and is fairly small in size. Now that alone, if you were to just describe that, that doesn't really seem like that would perhaps appeal to people psychologically. A lot of the cryptid phenomenon regarding the popularity of cryptids globally has to do with appeal, as strange as that might sound. If something's not interesting enough, a lot of people will figure, well, why talk about it? But the Kalanoro is not in that category because there are certainly things about it that make it worth talking about. The two main descriptions that go with Kalanoro sightings that make it so interesting are the orientation of its feet and the alleged quills on its back. The goal of this video is to try and ground that idea in a reality that isn't really hard to swallow, because you'll find, I think, that when you look at a lot of these cryptids, even if they're not real, you will find things that are common themes with recognized animals. Whether that's a product of psychology, who's to really say until they're proven or disproven. Until then, all we can do is speculate, and that's what this is. I'm going to go over these two traits and describe them in further detail so that we can get a better understanding of them, and then I'm going to talk about where we actually see these traits in the recognized animal kingdom. I'll also make sure to put timestamps for each trait. If you want to skip one that you don't find all that interesting, feel free to. The timestamp should be up on the screen right now. So without further ado, let's start off talking about the infamous backwards feet of the Kalanoro. This is probably the stranger of the two traits, because it just doesn't seem to make sense when you say it at first. For one thing, walking would seem to be extremely difficult, and they are described as bipeds, in the same vein that a lemur can be a biped. So it doesn't seem like backwards feet would be very beneficial, anatomically speaking. The explanation seems to be that, oh well, it makes it difficult for hunters to track them. That's why no one can ever find one, and that's why sightings are so rare. Now, if you're talking on a grand scale, yes, that is beneficial, but it seems strange that that would be a trait a species would develop specifically to not be tracked by humans. However, what is interesting about the backwards feet is that, although they're not truly found in the primate kingdom, and really they're not truly found in any kingdom for that matter, there are very similar structures found in the avian, the birds, specifically the bird group called the pamprodactyls. Now, the pamprodactyls have several different feet orientations, and 3 of those orientations do display toes that one could mistake for being backwards. I'll throw up a picture here, and you can see that C and B especially, it may be a bit in A, do certainly look weirdly mirrored on either side. Now, while this isn't truly backwards, it does give a small explanation to why a primate might have these quote-unquote backwards toes. Although a lot of the Kalanoro sightings are on the ground, especially those outside of Madagascar on the east coast of Africa, the sightings in Madagascar have described Kalanoro living in trees and moving in trees, and quite frankly, the reason that pamprodactyls seem to have these traits is because it allows for better gripping. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that the Kalanoro lacks half of this structure. It's completely backward feet, not mirrored feet. However, showing that a primate might have the advantage of having these strange backward toes, and showing that this advantage is actually a real one observed in the animal kingdom, does certainly lend the idea a tiny bit of credibility. Again, it is the stranger of the two traits, and it's definitely one that seems more far-fetched for the species, if it does exist. The next trait I'd like to talk about, and of course the last one, is one that I find very interesting. I do think it's the more interesting, although the less strange, out of the two. The trait is the quills that allegedly sit on the back of Kalanoros, like a porcupine quill set, really. Now, that might seem very far-fetched, perhaps even on the level of backwards feet, because why would a monkey have spikes on its back? It doesn't really seem to make sense. And although we can liken it to porcupines, we've already done that with pamperodactyls, and it's still a bit of a stretch because they're not the same species, and there usually don't tend to be all that many significant similarities between species that are so divergent. You might see a lot of similarities in reptiles and birds, but primates and birds, not so many. And of course, the same goes for a porcupine. A porcupine and a primate, not so many. However, we don't need porcupines to explain the quills on the Kalanoro's back if those quills and the Kalanoro exist. The following information is actually really what prompted me to make this video, and I hope all of you find this very interesting, because I certainly did. Stretching from the west to just about almost the east coast of Africa is a small tree-dwelling primate called the Pato. The Pato is a fairly docile species. It's very small. It's even called the softly by some English-speaking parts of Africa, indicating how not threatening the species seems. They're almost a bit like small sloths, really, because they also move very slow through these branches in the trees. It's the last thing you might expect to compare to a strangely, almost vicious, and almost really demonic in appearance animal like the Kalanoro. However, there's one trait that really links the two up. Not only are they both small primates, not only are they allegedly both tree-dwelling, not only are they both supposedly from the same continent, but they share in their ability to produce spikes from their spine. Looking at the skeleton of a Pato, again I'll throw up an image here so you can all see this, there's actually a few spines on the back that, when arched correctly, actually basically pierce the skin. And believe it or not, the Pato has been observed many times to use this as a defense mechanism, similar to the quills on a porcupine's back. Are these spikes as extreme as the nest of quills supposedly on the Kalanoro's back? Certainly not, but it does prove that that sort of thing is entirely possible in the primate kingdom. And I think that's a big step to understanding what's going on with the Kalanoro, whether we're seeing a new subspecies of Pato, or an entirely new creature, or simply ideas being spread throughout the continent in tribal locations. I'd love to know your thoughts on these similarities between the Kalanoro and other species of animals, especially with the spikes in the back, because that is really kind of what hit it home for me. I'd also like to know if you would like to see a video on the alleged Navy SEAL encounter with several Kalanoro, because I think it's an interesting story. My problem with it is that there's no evidence to corroborate it. So it would be a good story to tell and nothing else. And I want this to be a very thought-provoking channel. That being said, until next time.